Oh goodness, 8 minutes past through part, was it the previous anyway, recording, when it's in its long form, about 20 minutes or so. I realised, well, let me just say it, that the fault of religion can be, and very often is, I think, that we drop the relationship with God into a civil context. And the civil context is one of respect and deference. Whereas Jesus brings it back, I say back, but brings his view of God to a personal. It's not so much respect, it's love. And the actual form of the Old Testament commandments, as we called them, is rules. Thou shalt not have any other gods before me, and not worship other gods or make an image of such. And you should keep the Sabbath, where in some sense you think about me. And it's very dictatorial, isn't it? And it's as if it's coming from the authority that's over you. And Jesus' relationship was not that. It was, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and strength. Your God, yes, I've emphasized the your greatly, haven't I, previously? But it's love. And it wasn't actually love before. It was a list of rules. Why? Because these people didn't love in the story. Moses comes down from the mountain and they're worshipping something else. They're still back to their old love, which was the golden calf type Canaanite worship system. And this was utterly unacceptable to Moses. He drops or he throws, he destroys the law that God's about to give them. And in the end, of course, he goes back out of the mountain, in a sense saying, what do I do, God, with this people? And it's reflected in what God seems to say to him, his God, Moses' God. Moses' God responds in Moses' God's way. Step aside, Moses, I shall wipe them out, and I shall make a great people of you instead. And in the story, Moses is enlightened by the experience. This is Marshall's interpretation. I mean, just if you can bear running with it for a moment, do. I mean, I hope it will bless you. I trust it will. Says you can't do that, God. What will the heathen say? They'll think you weren't honouring your word. And it actually says, and God repented of his... God repented? You must be joking. God repented? He's perfect. You mean he didn't see this coming? He didn't know? I mean, suddenly if you come to it with quite honestly, if you come to it with a Jesus view, you think, what's going on here? And that, I think, is why someone like Marcion says, this is a different God. And Moses is making progress here. And the Gnostic Jews of Alexandria in around the 1st century, whatever it was, were making incredible progress in this regard. That, they read into it. What's going on in this story? What's it really getting at? It's a view of God that's different. And I suspect it's the Gnostic Jew, greatly influenced by Persian influence and Greek and Egyptian, you name it. I mean, it's a cosmopolitan city, and it's a world that's gone through all sorts of ghastly experiences. I think they're the writers of Jesus' story, and they're onto something. It's radically different. And you know, the Marcionite view, and we take Marcion to be, I don't know, is it from Anatolia or something, you know, what we call Turkey today. You know, he's probably that part of Greece or nearby Greece or something, you know. The Marcionite view is, no, you've got a demiurge God, in effect, in the Old Testament. The way the Hebrew religion had gone, had been written, and that one's true Jesus-type God, enlightened God, is one of love, not obedience, of grace, not judgment. My fundamentalist guy I met in the street, and I hesitate to call him friend because it was the most tempestuous conversation for about an hour or so in the street. Oh, goodness. He had a very judgmental God. And I take brethren to have that. I don't want to call their God a demiurge by any means, but I do want to say that their God is very frightening in some ways. In some ways. I mean, I don't mean some of them aren't incredibly kind and angelic people, but there's something frightening about the fundamentalism that sees God in terms of law. In other words, that's what the secular state is, law. Because it can't do anything else. It's not a human, it's not personal. Secular state is secular state. You know, it might be the emperor, but even the emperor hasn't got all power. He could be, goodness, murdered by his family overnight if he's not careful. And gets them first, apparently, according to Constantine. And if it's democratic, well, I mean, you're here today and gone tomorrow, aren't you? And this is the problem when Putin deals with the American president. He won't be the man that you're dealing with in 3 years' time. Highly likely. And he's not going to have the same relationship and promise with you. So Putin feels, you know, how do I get agreements with this sort of situation? They make laws, but they'll change them tomorrow. And they'll change the agreement. They'll go back on it. Dear, dear, dear. And we, of course, see a Russian president who's given himself life tenure as equally problematic, of course. And we know all about that. I've digressed. Let me pause. The essence of the matter here for this recording. Jesus brings in something radical change. To see God as a heavenly dad that loves you. It's not that there's no trace of it in the Old Testament. It's that he's suddenly bringing it to the absolute cornerstone of things. You know, for me, the crucifixion, the atonement, sacrifice, and all that theology is not the cornerstone at all. The key thing is the foundation. You see God as dad, loving and friendly. And if you have this trust in such a God, it transforms your life into life eternal, which is individual salvation, if you like, notion of heaven after death, as opposed to state worldly transformation of the favoured nation Israel being raised to glory by their God. It's different. And, you know, Jesus came in the story, as I see it, to show the difference, not the sameness, to what had previously come in, say, Judaism. or anything else. That relationship where God was of love is utterly different, and what we find we truly value at heart. And in that sense, he could say in the story, I am the way. Not that, the story is perfect. Not that he even lived historically. But that this is truly what we might value. That it's a way of love, not perfectly explained in the story, but strongly emphasized, compared to what's strongly emphasized in traditional fundamentalist religion, which I see as Old Testament, definitely still in the Pauline thing where he justifies everything from Old Testament reference, probably because he doesn't know anything about the Jesus story, and not what's in Revelation, which seems to be a hybrid of Old Testament type, horrific stuff. Well, not even Old Testament, very much Babylonian mythology, dressed with a bit of, an introduction, which is from a Jesus, churches, and advice sort of point of view. And with an ending stuck on that, but I did see a new heaven and a new earth. And we have a couple of chapters on the discourse on heaven. And both of those can be seen as helpful and valuable, but in some sense they're so out of place with what the bulk of Revelation is about, which is a horrific account. I mean, I can't read it. It's just, I have done, and I don't, and I find some masters of Revelation tie up what it all means and symbolically and fascinating, but I found it a fantastically large byroad myself. I don't like the curse at the end too. Anyone that changes this is, that's a typical Egyptian pharaonic thing on the pyramids and the temples, wasn't it? The graves, the temple where the actual body might be interred. A curse to keep you away and protect them. That's not my God either, no way. And that lingers right the way through to Revelation, that sort of God. So in some ways I don't see the Jesus story as Egyptian. I see it as highly likely to be Gnostic, North Africa, in the Gnostic view of the Hebrew understanding. And I think they may well have got it, and that they may well be the authors of the Jesus story, at least in its early form, before the state got hold of it and improved it from the state's point of view. Yeah, highly likely. And I don't know. And you could say I have not sufficient evidence and so forth. I might argue the same back too. Yes. Thank you, Heavenly Dad. Well, I seem to be calling this recording E2084E, and I'm thinking, well, what has God added here? Just as a note. I think the radical change of the Jesus story, that he's our dad, loves us, that's not really what majors in the Old Testament at all. It's a frightening approach to life and religion. And I think Jesus introduces something majorly, fundamentally and foundationally. And it's not some Old Testament gloss of crucifixion and sacrifice and atonement for sin and payment to a wrathful God, that there'll be a frightening judgment in the end. It's a parental, these are my children. I extend grace and I love them, and I will have them grow into wonderful persons like myself, to give me a wonderful communion and family in heaven, a blessing to all of us eternally. I am come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. Why? Because I'm God of the living God, and all live unto me. Wow. So I say, may we love you, Lord, more. And I trust that that's exactly what you're doing, Lord, Heavenly Dad. And even as Jesus puts it, just occasionally, dearest friend. Wow. I think it's a question of love, not law. Thank you, Heavenly Dad.